Ahead on Straight Talk.
We know that climate change is the most existential threat that we're facing.
From salmon populations to wildfire risk, the impacts of climate change are far-reaching. And with new federal rollbacks on environmental initiatives,
it's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. Climate change, no matter what happens, you're involved in that.
we hear from a career journalist who's covered the issue for decades. But first, as the Trump administration continues its immigration crackdown,
I want you to run the biggest deportation operation this country's ever seen.
Portland city leaders are pushing back.
As leaders, I believe it is incumbent upon us to use every single tool we have to stand up for our community.
We're joined by two city councilors to break down steps they say align city laws with city values on immigration. Right now on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Stephanie Domerat. Now, in the past few weeks, the city of Portland has taken center stage in the national debate over President Donald Trump's immigration enforcement. City leaders have rejected many of the administration's demands and taken steps to affirm Portland's status as a sanctuary city. That includes passing two proposals this week. City councilors say are aimed at protecting Portlanders from federal overreach. Joining us today to discuss those proposals are Portland City Council President Alana Pertle-Guiney. Pertle-Guiney was elected to represent District 2 on Portland's newly restructured city council last year. She was elected the city's first ever council president in January. Also joining us is City Councilor Candace Avalos. Avalos was elected to represent District 1 last year. Avalos also serves as the chair of the city's Homelessness and Housing Committee. Councilors, thank you so much for being with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
First, I want to talk about, of course, the Portland City Council unanimously voting to approve two resolutions this week, one called the Protect Portland Initiative, the other to codify the city's status as a sanctuary city. So let's talk about the Protect Portland Initiative first. Now, the two of you, along with two other councilors, introduced this. Councilor Avalos, I want to start with you. Why did you introduce this resolution? I believe you were inspired by something going on in Chicago. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. As we were seeing things unfold across the country, and in particular, Chicago was kind of one of those early flashpoints, Mayor Brandon Johnson announced a Protect Chicago initiative executive order. And so I looked into that and really felt it was a good framework that we could set, not only here in Portland, but I think it could spark a movement across the country for cities to build up the firewalls they need to protect their local sovereignty and protect their residents and community members from federal overreach.
We're seeing a lot of other cities, right? Not just Portland, that are dealing, like you said, Chicago, other cities that are dealing with kind of the federal versus local or state officials and what they say should be done. I want to ask specifically, Council President, what will this resolution, this one resolution, do?
So there's a lot in here, but let me pull just a few things in. It gives us a framework to develop a rapid response program for when we see ICE raids escalate in Portland. It allows us to do that both for the community and also to ensure that we have a plan if city employees are detained during the workday. We know that the administration has detained people who are U.S. citizens, has detained people who are in the process of going through their immigration work, so we need to be worrying about that as well. It directs the police department to add on to the work that they are already doing to ensure that they know when federal agents are working in our city, and make sure that we not only are asking federal agents who are here, who are you working for, what are you doing here, but also tracking those incidences. And when we can't verify what federal agency a law enforcement officer is working for, make sure that we actually go through that process of investigating who this person is and what they're doing on our streets so that we can keep people safe in our community. Those are just two of the, a dozen or more things that we cover in the resolution.
Councilor, did you want to add to that of some of the other things it will do?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's also about ensuring that the community and the city employees all have similar protocols and understanding for what to do when interacting with the federal government, protecting our residents from getting, from the federal government getting our information, so protecting our privacy, things like that. And in general, you know, we have a city of 7,000 employees, and we needed to be speaking with one voice clearly so everyone understood what the game plan is. So that's a lot of what we are explaining in the resolution.
By this passing unanimously, what did that say to you, and what do you think it says outward to people beyond Portland? Let's start with you.
We've had a lot of conversations over the last month about how our city can step up and respond to the federal administration's overreach and, frankly, inappropriate focus on Portland. And this is the first step in taking action together. We know that the entire city council stands for common values that Portlanders share, and we needed to show Portlanders that we were acting as one united body. Obviously, there are different approaches that different councilors are considering right now, but we knew that these two items, we would be able to say to Portland, we are on the same page, standing up for our community's values.
So one component in the resolution was a multilingual public education campaign, right, with community outreach. I want to ask, for those who support stricter federal immigration enforcement, why is it appropriate for the city, which isn't part of immigration enforcement, to be involved in this sort of a way?
I think at the end of the day, it doesn't matter where you come from or what you look like. If you have 2 feet in this country, you have rights, there are laws. And it is our duty as a city to enforce our own laws by codifying sanctuary status. We are putting another layer of protection for our ability to govern in the way that we were elected to. So I think at the end of the day, we believe it's our duty to protect Portlanders' rights, and that's what we're doing in these through these measures.
Councilor Perligini, did you have anything to add to that?
I just want to pull one piece that Councilor Avalos talked about, which is that we have a duty to make sure that Portlanders understand their rights. And that's what this piece of the resolution is about. It is our job as the city government to make sure that Portlanders understand what the laws are, what their responsibilities are, what their rights are. And in order to make sure that everyone in our community has that information at a time when, frankly, immigration enforcement is looking a little bit different than it has in the past. That's a very important role for us to play as leaders in our community.
So we've heard reports from people saying there are increased ICE arrests or agent presence around the city of Portland. Have either of you heard that from people in your district?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we heard just from yesterday there was about 17 new arrests, and we also saw that there was a bigger bus that they brought into the ICE facility. So they were operating on these geo vans. Now they have these geo buses that can have capacity for 20 to 30 people. So that to us is a signal that they intend to ramp up their detentions, and we are seeing an increase in calls to the Portland Immigration Rights Coalition about these increased kidnappings.
When did this start happening that you think you're seeing an increased presence, or you've heard reports of that?
I've heard an increase over really just the last few days. We had expected, as more federal agents have been coming into our city, that this would happen eventually, but it's really been within this last week that I have been hearing more from community about seeing enforcement officers in community, seeing more people being detained.
Something that stood out to me in the resolution was part of how to investigate potential crimes by impersonators of ICE agents. Are you seeing that happen right now in our neighborhoods? People impersonating agents?
We haven't heard reports of that yet in Portland at this time. We know that's something that has happened in the past, and we know that's something that folks have been very concerned with in other communities. We need to get ahead of that here, right? We need to have plans in place before it's an issue.
What are you hearing, Councilor?
Yeah, also that we haven't heard any specific instances of that happening, but it is happening across the country. And ultimately, we're concerned that people are afraid to use our services, including our police, to call for help because they're worried about a possible interaction with ICE. And so it's important to understand who are the local officials and what their responsibilities are, and not have those cross over into federal duties.
Is there a way that the city is tracking ICE arrests that are happening across the city? Is that something that's part of this resolution or that you've been doing already?
This resolution doesn't ask our city government to track ICE arrests. That is something that many of our nonprofit organizations, the partners who we have been working with to make sure that we are filling in the gaps in our current laws, have been doing. And it is, I think, a really important piece of the work. The city government is not going to be able to do everything. We need to fill in where we can, and one of those places is tracking federal agents, including ICE agents, interactions with Portlanders, which is part of what we're asking the police to do in a more comprehensive way.
So as of this taping, I want to let viewers know it's Thursday afternoon. This issue is constantly evolving, and of course the Ninth Circuit is expected to issue a ruling on a restraining order blocking the Trump administration's deployment of National Guard troops to Portland. During last week's hearing, Judge Nelson made a comment about Portland's handling of the ICE building, specifically referencing how windows were at some point earlier this year boarded up to protect the building, and that the city of Portland slapped them with a zoning violation. Here's what he had to say. He asked the attorney for the state of Oregon.
So they reopened the building, they board the windows for protection. And what does the city of Portland do? They issue a zoning violation. Are you defending issuing a zoning violation, telling them to take off the boards that were put up to respond to protesters? Do you think that that was maybe ill-advised?
So in hindsight, do you think that the city's approach about the zoning violation of boarding up the windows maybe was an appropriate response in this situation?
So the way that zoning enforcement works in the city is largely complaint driven. And my understanding is that we received a complaint about the boards on the windows. That is a violation of our zoning requirements. That was investigated. It was found that there was a violation. And at that point, we have to issue that finding.
So what do you think, Counselor?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, those land use things are really finicky and really they're super limited in what we can actually do, and we just have to follow the book of the law. So that was kind of a pretty simple procedural thing. I understand the implication in the question or in the comments from the judge, but as far as we're concerned, it was procedural.
We only have about 30 seconds, so I want to ask about the codifying the sanctuary status. Why do that at this time, Counselor Avalos?
Yeah, I'm really happy that Councillor Canal and I and others co-sponsored this to be able to really put into our code, into our law, so that it is enforceable by law, what those protections are for our city. And so we felt that it complemented the Protect Portland initiative really well, which really kind of wraps its arms around all of the different kinds of codes and laws that we need to implement to continue to protect against Trump, because this is just the beginning. Yeah.
Counselors, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And thanks so much for watching. When we come back, we'll sit down with a climate journalist who studies the warming planet. What he says is the biggest step you can take to help the environment. Stay with us. And welcome back to Straight Talk. We are no strangers to natural disasters here in the Pacific Northwest, whether it be wildfires, extreme heat, or ice storms. And data shows a shifting global climate is making them more frequent and costly, and understanding the science and politics behind them is more important than ever. Joining us today is Jeff Goodell, an award-winning journalist and author. Goodell has been covering climate change and its effects for more than 2 decades. His most recent book, Heat Will Kill You First: Life and Death on a Scorching Planet, looks at the ways our planet is changing, particularly when it comes to extreme heat events. Goodell has also been awarded a 2020 Guggenheim Fellowship in General Nonfiction for his work. Jeff, thanks so much for being here today.
Nice to be here.
We appreciate you stopping in.
Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you first, your newest book is now a New York Times bestseller, The Heat Will Kill You First. It was also selected as one of the best books of the year by NPR, The Economist, and the LA Times. It's made a huge impact. Now, in your book, you make the argument that heat is the biggest threat to humans and our world. Why was it important for you to write this book?
Well, I've been writing about climate change for a long time, 25 years or so. And, there's a lot of aspects to climate change, from droughts to increased hurricane intensities to, there's many ways of thinking about climate change. But heat is the one that is most dangerous to us as people, as humans, as people who lived through the heat dome in 2021 here in the Pacific Northwest saw. I mean, it is what I call in the book, a predatory force. It goes after people who are the most vulnerable in our society. And I think that it's also accelerating most quickly of all the sort of impacts of continuing to burn fossil fuels. And so I think it's important for people to understand the risks. And that's basically why I wrote the book.
Well, you mentioned the heat dome in 2021, which was an extreme heat event. It was so disastrous, so devastating here. It included the dozens of deaths, sadly, in Oregon and Multnomah County. This happened in 2021. Now, many of the people who died were in their homes and they didn't have access to air conditioning. Now, we know this trend is happening all over the world where many people don't have the luxury of cooling. And as we see our heat rising, it becomes very dangerous, whether that's in a food truck or working on a farm or in a field. So how can we as a system and as people do better to keep people safe as this change continues?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, one is access to air conditioning, right? Having more and more access to air conditioning, helping people. One of the big issues with air conditioning is just paying your electric bill because it's expensive to run air conditioning. So figuring out ways to subsidize that and to just get more people to have air conditioning. But it's more than that, right? It's also about communicating better, media organizations doing a better job of communicating about heat waves and the risks and what to do about them. I live in Texas where there are flash floods, and everywhere I was at a Starbucks yesterday morning, and right outside of Starbucks, it has a sign in the parking lot about what to do if there's a flash flood. We have nothing like that about heat waves. People don't understand what to do. Do I open the windows? Do I close the windows? Do I put the shades down? What do I do? Do I drink more water? How do I, so there's a lot of education to be done and a lot of messaging to be done about it. We have very clear threat risks about, like hurricanes, for example, Category 1, Category 2, Category 3. Everybody knows what that means. They know if it's a Category 3, Category 4, it's a serious hurricane. We don't do that with heat waves. All we say is it's going to be hot. And people don't understand kind of what that means or what the lethal thresholds are. So there's a lot to do with just educating people and doing a better job of being proactive about what to do when a heat wave is coming.
You wrote an essay recently in the New York Times that kind of talked about an interesting impact of this heat is that many people who have air conditioning or who have resources or have more privilege are not as in danger to what we will see as it continues to this heat. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, in the New York Times piece, I wrote about the sort of what I call the divide between the cooled and the cooked, which maybe is a kind of blunt way to put it, but I think it's very real. And, people like you and I we're in an air-conditioned office right now, studio right now. We live in, I don't know if your house is air-conditioned, but many people do have air conditioning, have access to cooling. They're not working outside. They're not, doing roofing on a really hot day in the middle of summer. They're not postal workers, FedEx delivery people, agricultural workers whose job depends on being outside and don't have the luxury of saying, I want to go inside for a 2-hour break right now. Mm-hmm. And so the effects of this warming that we're seeing and these kinds of heat domes and heat waves are borne much more heavily on these outdoor workers who do not have the luxury of retreating to cool spaces the way we do.
Now, this is a big question, but what are the biggest culprits that are contributing to this rising heat we're seeing?
Well, I mean, that's a sort of very simple question. I mean, it's burning fossil fuels, right? 70% of the CO2 that's going up into the atmosphere is from burning fossil fuels. So when you start to think about what do we do about heat and extreme heat, the first thing we have to do is think about how to more quickly get off of fossil fuels and shift to clean, renewable energy. That's, number one thing that we need to do. The other thing is thinking differently about our built spaces, about access to cooling, as I talked about, shade in neighborhoods. It's a very clear throughout, not just in Portland, but in every city, that richer neighborhoods have much more shade, much more parks, much more access to swimming pools and things like that. Poorer neighborhoods have much less, so that addressing that is a big issue also.
At the federal level, we're seeing changes right now when it comes to climate policy. We're seeing rollbacks on protections and provisions promoting more use of fossil fuels. What are you watching most closely right now when it comes to legislation or policy?
Well, there's so much going on. I mean, rollbacks is a gentle way of putting it. I mean, we're seeing a full-scale assault on climate science and a full-scale push on fossil fuels. And, there's so much going on right now on this, it is sort of hard to keep my eye on everything. I mean, the push right now to roll back at the EPA this thing called the endangerment finding, which is the basis for a lot of regulation about CO2, which basically says that climate change is dangerous and it has health effects. which is a straightforward answer. It's obviously been studied, at great length by scientists. It's very clear, and yet the Trump administration is trying to roll that back to allow more fossil fuels to be burned and to kind of, bury the science on climate change and deny that it's a serious issue. And if anyone knows that climate change is a serious issue, it's the people who live in Oregon and in Portland who saw a very clear example of this with the heat dome in 2021 and how brutal and devastating and deadly it can be.
When we hear about warnings about climate change and our planet, it can be very overwhelming, right? It can be very, how do I play a role in helping this situation? So what can be done around this for people?
Well, there's lots to be done, and I think that there's no simple answer for, one thing obviously is voting for candidates who care about this and think about this. Another is talking about it, not being afraid to talk about it and to educate yourself around the science. But really, it's about what you're good at. I'm a writer. I'm good at writing stories and doing journalism and interpreting science. So that's what I do. You're a newscaster. You're having me on the air. We're talking about this. Other people are, educators, teachers who can talk about this. If you're a Wall Street investor looking at revenue streams and investment streams about this. If you're an artist, incorporating this into your art. It's about figuring out what you're good at and then applying this to that.
Do you think there are a few specific things that everyone can do, maybe, or anyone can do on a day-to-day basis, whether that, is, I don't know, just choosing a way to live your life differently? Like, what would that be if you were going to tell everyone that you could speak to? Just try this one thing, to make an impact. What would it be?
Well, I think trying the one thing to make an impact, there's two things. One is to reduce your energy consumption to the degree that you can, because ultimately that is the problem, right? And the second thing is to talk about this, to have a conversation with your neighbor, to have a conversation with your son or daughter or father or grandfather or coworkers, and begin to take this out of any kind of science ghetto or something like that, and to realize that this is our world now. Our world is changing fast. The better we understand this changing world, the better we'll be able to cope with the risks in our own way.
It is hard, I think, for a lot of people to want to talk about it. So, I think it's helpful when you say, just maybe start small or read more or talk to somebody else, about what you can do every day. So you're in Oregon this week for a lecture at Pacific University. It's clearly important to you to educate and speak to younger generations. Why is that?
Because I think that we're at an inflection point in our world, and it's not just about shifting from fossil fuels to cleaner, cheaper energy. I think we have this opportunity, if we understand what's going on, to build a better world. I think that there is an opportunity to construct houses in ways that are more comfortable, easier to live in, are not dependent upon this mechanical clanking air conditioning, to have cars and electric transportation that is cleaner and more efficient than the old V8s and SUVs that people have been driving, to organize cities in new ways with more green space, more bicycling. I think that there's a real opportunity to use this not as a kind of doomsday story, but as a let's build a better world story. And I think that the opportunities are all around us.
Okay. If you want to leave a note for any of our viewers with all of your kind of work and all of your expertise around this, the climate and environment, what would you want them to take away from this?
That we're just at the beginning of thinking about this. This is a long story that's going to play out in all of our lives, for not just our lives, but for generations. And to begin to think about it that way, that this is not something that's going to go away. We're living in a rapidly changing world, and we need to think about that and use it to our advantage.
Jeff Goodell, thank you so much for coming in today. Appreciate your time.
Thanks.
And thanks so much for joining us here on Straight Talk. If you have an idea or person you'd like us to interview, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us an email to the address on your screen, straighttalk@kgw.com. And a reminder, you can stream Straight Talk on your own schedule. You can download the free KGW Plus app, available now on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next week.